Okay, all right. So we'll go ahead and continue. So the goal is to get through a class Bravo flight. I had two scenarios in mind. We're definitely not going to do two. We're going to do one, and we're going to do the long distance one. So here it is. It is Fort Worth to Foxtrot 87. Dallas Fort Worth. Beautiful Union Parish. If anyone was curious why I landed in Union Parish, it's because they had really cheap gas and I needed to stop somewhere on a flight from Dallas-Fort Worth to Savannah, Georgia. And so this is also a good real-world skill to kind of pick up if you're paying for your own fuel. Go to 100oled.com or 100ll.com and picked some approximately halfway points between the two airports. I knew I'd have to do at least one fuel stop. Well, I would have to do one fuel stop, and I didn't really care where that was. So I picked an approximate halfway point. I think I may have picked Monroe right here, Monroe Regional, which I knew wouldn't have cheap fuel, but the 100oled.com is awesome because you just put in that one airport, and it'll find you the cheapest fuel within a couple, maybe 100-mile radius of that, and list from cheapest to most expensive. And Union Parish was very affordable. In fact, so affordable I couldn't believe the price. So I called the airport and said, "Are you sure your fuel is that much?" And they said yes. So that's why we're going from Dallas-Fort Worth to Union Parish. This story ended very badly for me, but that'll be during the Q&A. I can explain what happened. But ended up in the back of a sheriff's vehicle. So that's really that story worth telling. Okay, so let's go to Dallas-Fort Worth. That'll probably keep people sticking around at the end. Dallas-Fort Worth. Does not get much merry. This would be my second, no, 1, 2, 3. This is only my third time departing VFR out of a Bravo airport. And I know nothing about DFW itself. I'd landed there IFR days before, but now I was going to depart VFR in the interest of time. So here I was in the FBO at Dallas-Fort Worth, and that was over here where my mouse is. And I know that I need to go east, and it's a 238-mile flight, then the fuel stop. So this is not as long now that I think about it as I thought this flight was going to be, but it's still a good distance, longer than anything we've covered before. So we'll do the same format, but relatively quick. And I'm going to stick with my original promise that I'll try not to repeat anything. Any skills unless I think there's a really good reason for doing it. But I want to try and focus with the time we have on what is new and interesting about this. And the things that are new and interesting about this flight, the first one that's obvious is the Bravo. The second one is it's a departure out of the hairiest airspace that we've dealt with in the workshop so far. In terms, there's just so you know, Dallas Love Field is also a Bravo over here. So we got a Bravo there and a Bravo there. So this is a conjoined Bravo. There's a Delta over there. It's relatively hairy airspace, so how would you plan to get out of this airspace? And the answer ends up being really, really simple. I think you'll enjoy it, at least what I ended up doing, and we'll see if anyone else had a different way of doing it. And the other part that's new is the distance. So how can we plan this flight quickly? Because as we saw with the last one, that was only a 23, 24-mile flight, and we need to we need to make this process scale. So how can we simplify this and do some flight planning that is reasonable and safe, but not spend 3 days planning our flight? There's a certain amount of utility that you look for when you fly the airplane, and for me, it's when I fly for business, I need to get from the time I decide I need to go from Dallas-Fort Worth to Union Parish Airport. It's not about how fast the plane is, because the fastest plane in the world won't matter if you have to spend 6 hours planning the flight. So to make the entire process scalable and efficient, this is a little bit beyond a student pilot mentality, and I wouldn't want student pilots to think along these lines. But as you move towards the future, once you've got your ticket and you're flying routinely, I would encourage you to think of ways to streamline your flight planning so that you get as much utility as you can out of the flight. Sorry, out of having your ticket when time is important to you. If you're only flying once every 3 weeks on a Sunday and you've got the whole day to do it and you don't care where you go, then by all means enjoy the flight planning process. Enjoy looking at the sectional, every little detail on the sectional. I love doing that when I can. But when I'm parked here at this airport and I need to get to Savannah, Georgia, as soon as I can, I need a quick flight planning method. And this is what it really is. So it's a Bravo. I don't care about the details of the Bravo yet. We're going to get to that in a sec. So I know I'm going to be heading east. So let's assume our flight starts at Lake Ray Hubbard, for example. We're just not concerned about the minutia of getting out of DFW just yet. We will be, trust me. But for now, big picture flight planning. How does this puppy look? Let's zoom out and have a look. Forgive me, I'm going to have to do quite a bit of zooming out. And I'm going to use the world chart. There's no boundaries on it. Okay, so this is the big picture view that I start with. So it's a straight line the way it's drawn because that's what SkyVector gives us. And I used 4Flight for this, but the process will be almost identical. So I get a very quick view of where are we starting and where are we going. Okay, we're heading east. There we go. That's what I need to know. We're heading east, and really quickly, any major other Bravos or scary airspace, and the answer is no. There's something down here, we'll find out what that is. There's something over here, we'll find out what that is. And then, anyone remember, we've been through these a million times, it'll be interesting to see who remembers. What are all these purple circles, and do we need to care about them? Moon is right, echo airspace. Any what do they mean specifically? They are to do with echo, but what does it mean? Yep, it changes the altitude. So Mark is thinking along the right lines. That's correct. Geneva has an answer. I'm not going to say whether it's right or wrong yet, but so Mark has the idea. These things adjust the surface. Sorry, these things adjust where the class echo begins. So starting at the bottom, we have Gulf airspace, then we have echo above it. These purple circles just drop that echo down a little bit. From a planning perspective, we don't care. So as it turns out, Geneva is correct. And yep, Chris just chimed in. That's correct. It drops the echo from starting at 1200, it drops it now so it starts at 700 feet. That has absolutely no bearing on our flight whatsoever, which is good. So what looked like a ton of landmines, maybe to the untrained eye, or if you're kind of rusty on this part, I shouldn't say the untrained eye, if you're just simply rusty on this aspect of it, none of these circles exist. So the only things that exist are a circle over here, which we're probably going to miss, at least on the direct routing we'll miss it, and then a circle over here. So now let's start looking for anything major along the route. Now I am not a big fan of going GPS direct. It has nothing to do with flight training or anything at this point. For me, it's more of a reliability issue. I have on occasion had problems with GPS in my plane. Admittedly, not in the last 2 years. It's been very stable now for me since I made some changes to the antenna or relocated it. But even so, it's taught me to just be a little bit shy of relying solely on GPS. So I love having the GPS. I love double checking on the GPS, but I don't want to be navigating primarily by GPS when I could have, with 30 seconds of work, had given myself some other options such that if my GPS now crashes, I truly don't care. So as you're doing these long, if it was a 20-mile flight, sure, punch in the GPS direct, and if that happens to not work, you'll probably work something out. But on a longer flight like this, it behooves you to come up with some other plan because you really don't want to go the 238 miles having no clue how to get there. And so Moon, excellent. Moon's got the right idea. That's what I do. I look for VORs that are pretty much along my route of flight. That is bang on. So this is literally what I do. I keep my direct line here. What we're trying to do is look for small bends in that line, ignoring what I said before about the student flight planning where you're literally writing down all the numbers. We're not doing that for this flight. So don't be afraid to do small bends in the line that will give us a redundant form of navigation. And so that's exactly what I do, and I start heading for VORs. So here's the equipment VOR, and I have fond memories of that. That was the first VOR along the flight. So it's all coming back to me now. So I literally just drag the route over to 1. That's it. Now here's what I want to do to illustrate a point, because some people are so obsessed with going direct, they don't want to make a single turn because it's going to take longer. So let's now assume we're in a 200 knot airplane. I take that back. Let's not assume we're in a 200 knot airplane. We're going to still stick with our we're going to stick with a 120 knot airplane because this will actually prove the point even more. So we're just in the same 172 as before. This is about a 2-hour flight. So this is nearly 240 miles, and we're doing 120 miles per hour, so about 2 hours. That's correct. Let's see how much it adds. I said that our flight would start over at this lake, so let's add that part. I'm just right-clicking and picking out a point. So there's the first 26 miles done. If we can get ourselves anywhere over this lake, that was the first lake. You know, I'm not going to worry about the lake set. Let's just do the pure VORs for a second. All right, so we're at 1 hour and 59 minutes. Let's add the Quitman VOR. Well, it literally hasn't even added 1/10 of a minute. So not even 6 seconds to the flight to use Quitman. So that extra level of redundancy, it's given us awareness about Quitman. We can tune it in from a ways out. It has literally cost us nothing in the scheme of things. So let's keep scrolling. We don't want to get caught up in any real level of detail. So this is literally how I planned the flight, sitting in the FBO. I'm trying to recreate what I did so people can see where I'm going with this. Literally just scrolled and said, oh great, here's another one, Belcher, and I kind of laughed because that's a funny name for a VOR. Let's do the same thing. Bubkiss, not even 1/10 of a minute so far between these two deviations. So we've now traveled, let's see, we've only got 75 miles left. So we've traveled a pretty good distance, and it's cost us nothing to use these two VORs. Both in terms of flight time and planning time. This was not a difficult exercise. It was looking along the direct line of flight, finding nearby VORs, and dragging the rubber band over the top of them. Same thing on ForeFlight that I did in the real FBO as what I'm doing now here on SkyVector. And we're done. That's really it in terms of things that will help us, immediate nav aids that will truly help us. So now I started looking for, okay, how long are these segments between the VORs? Am I going to be able to receive the VORs? And are there any geographic landmarks that are going to help me? So, if these VORs ended up being 200 apart, then we have a window there where we may not be able to receive the one that we were on, and we're not receiving the one we're heading to. So that's what I'm looking for. So as long as we're not traveling more than about 50 miles without being able to either talk to the one that was behind us or the one that was ahead of us, that is ahead of us, I'm feeling pretty good. So spacing is looking good. So now we go back to the beginning. Now I'm looking for geographical landmarks. And why am I doing that? It makes the flight more fun. It keeps you more engaged. Doesn't take long to do. And heaven forbid the VORs are out. Because what I'm probably not going to do, quite honestly, is brief to the level, not for a VFR flight. For IFR, 100% absolutely I would brief at this level. But for a VFR flight, I'm probably not going to check to see if all the VORs are working for the route of flight. I know some people might be throwing their arms up in the air and saying that's blasphemous, but I want to be realistic. Again, I'm sitting in the FBO and I'm trying to get out of there as soon as I can, safely. And I don't consider it to be unsafe in good weather to not check if all the VORs along the way that I was planning on using are working. Because again, it's a form of redundancy that I'm looking for. So if I get up in the air and it turns out Quiltman is down, I'll survive. And why will I survive? Because there are 3 enormous lakes between Dallas and this VOR. So I'm going to spot this first lake, and I'm going to wonder how far away is the next lake. Well, the planning makes it real easy. Instead of it being a direct leg from the first lake to the VOR, without bending anything, I'm just going to pick a random point. I'm going to pick the tip of the lake, and I'm going to ask for that to be now a point on the lake. Okay, so it's only 20 nautical miles from the first lake to the second lake. That's fantastic. How long is it going to take us to go 20 miles at 120 knots? 10 minutes. Lingo has an answer of 10. He's getting the idea that you All right, I'll close these so that people can't see it. Yep, these are where the estimates come in handy. And I'm not doing these on the ground, by the way, because there's no point me knowing all this in advance. Once you start feeling for the scale, so whatever scale we're working on at the time, so assuming I'm working on this scale as I now, which is probably what I'm going to do, quite honestly, is I drag this route again. So first pass, just to recap, first pass at this was just working out what the direct route was. Second part was was checking for airspace, major gotchas with airspace or terrain. I didn't really talk about the terrain, but that would be something to be taken note of at the 30,000 foot view too. Third pass at it was looking at VORs that we could easily incorporate without it inconveniencing us a great deal. And now we're on this fourth pass, we're trying to fill in the space between the VORs conveniently. And so that's what I'm going to do. I'm not going to be zooming out probably too much at this point. I'll be dragging instead. So it's 20 miles from the first lake to the second. That's about 10 minutes. So by the time we've enjoyed the view over that lake, we should be looking ahead for a giant lake. I mean, this is enormous, which is fantastic. So an enormous lake with a bridge in the middle of it, and another bridge over there, and another bridge over there. That's what we're going to be looking for as soon as we're done with that lake. I wouldn't worry so much about these small airports. On a flight like this, by the way, gone are the ideas of flying at 2,000 and 3,000 feet. Most likely you'll be climbing up, at least to get the best performance and the minimum fuel burn, you're going to want to climb up to 7,500 feet, 8,500 feet, something like that. And without getting, because we have limited time left and this isn't an engine management workshop, being up at those altitudes in a non-turbocharged airplane, so getting up to 75 or 8,500 feet, it allows you to firewall the throttle and lean the mixture. So there's nothing wrong with firewalling the throttle generally at low altitudes, but you have to do it with a mixture full rich. Think of that as being like an afterburner in an F-16. Great fun, lots of power, and horrific fuel burn. Same thing is true in single engine piston. So down low at full power, you'll be burning in your 172 with an IO360, you'll probably be burning 15, 16 gallons an hour. And if you do the same thing up at 9,500 feet or 7,500 feet, throttle to the wall, so same throttle position, I don't want to say power setting because that can be misleading, you're going to get effectively the same performance or close enough to it, but you're also allowed to lean the mixture out, which you couldn't do down low without it causing a significant problem. So you get to burn less fuel. You'll be down to about 9 gallons an hour. And that matters. That matters when we start talking about these longer flights. It's not that you go a whole lot faster, although I almost guarantee in this case you would go faster. Why might we go faster at heading from Dallas-Fort Worth to Union Parish up at 9,500 feet or 7,500 feet than if we did it down at 2,000 feet? It's weather related. Okay, we have a winds aloft answer. The air is denser. Victoria, where is the air denser? Up high or low? Okay, good. Correct. Yeah, the air is denser down low. As it turns out, your speed over the ground, let's assume there was no wind, your speed over the ground is going to be about the same. So your true airspeed will be about 120 if you're down on the ground. And if you look at your airspeed indicator at, say, 1,000 feet, it will read about 120 as well. So you're going to feel really excited as a private pilot seeing that airspeed indicator being at 120. You climb up to 7,500 feet and things don't seem so impressive now. Your airspeed indicator is going to say 100 and, oh geez, don't quote me, 100 or 105. It'll be less. I promise you it'll be less than 120. So you're thinking, oh, well, I'm going slower, but I've got redundancy, I'm burning less fuel. Sorry, not redundancy. I've got more places to land, I've got time. So you think you're making a compromise. Your speed over the ground will be about 120 knots, same as what it was when you were down on the ground, or when you were down at 1,000 feet. So you have to, the airspeed indicator is a big fat liar once you get higher. You have to ignore the indicated airspeed, or adjust for it, I should say. So your actual ground speed, sorry, your true airspeed, which is your speed through the air, will be about the same, but you are doing it with less fuel burn. So that's awesome. However, the thing that's what I said was, it's not just that we're going to get there at the same speed. I actually said that it's likely that you'll be faster up at 7,500 feet over the ground than you will when you're on the ground, and it's because of the prevailing wind. So generally speaking, you're going to be running into westerly winds as far as I've seen, most parts of the country. So, and the higher you go, the more true that certainly becomes. Once you're up into the jet stream, it's practically undeniable. But usually at around 5,000 plus, you start looking at westerly winds much of the time. It can be a little bit more north or a little bit more south, or considerably more north than south. But it is pretty darn rare to get hefty easterly winds up high. In the parts of the country that I have flown, I should preface that. So out in California, always westerly winds. Here in the Northeast, almost always westerly winds. Down south, a little bit more north and south. So maybe in the Midwest, I just haven't paid enough attention. Depends on the pressure systems that come in, I suppose. You might get stuck with an easterly wind, but pretty safe bet as a starting point at least. That's one of the benefits of going high, and that is one of the things I would check on a flight like this. I would find out what the winds aloft are going to be for different altitudes, because you could go at 55, 75, 95, 11.5. Those are all doable. Maybe not the 11.5 so much in a 172. Things will start getting very very slow in the real sense of the word. So that's when you'd look specifically to see what the winds are doing. Okay, so let's see. That was the brief diversion on, it's relevant, but it was a small diversion on what altitude we'd go at and what sort of winds we'd see. So here we are up at high altitudes, and one of the beautiful things about flying real high, you can't see diddly on the ground, but you can sure see far away. And these giant lakes, you'll see it relatively easily. So leaving this lake, the goal you always want to have is how quickly can I see my next checkpoint? It's like cookies and milk. It's a beautiful thing. You want to be able to see that next checkpoint as soon as you can, so that if all else fails, you can use your eyes to look outside and fly the plane and know where you're going. So we want to be spotting that lake, and the reason I chose this flight is because I did this flight, and this is the exact route I did, and I remember a lot of it very clearly. So very easy to spot that lake, and life was good. So as soon as you spot the lake, you relax, quite honestly, quite a bit, and you just enjoy looking for different things. So I remember trying to find any of these private airports, and I had no luck whatsoever. I think I found the town of Terrell, and I think I found the airport from up high of Terrell, but I couldn't see these small I couldn't see the private strips, and I don't think I even saw the public strip here. Anyway, so continued on looking for the lake. So let's see, we're doing our multiple passes of the flight planning. We're looking again for VFR, reference points on the ground in between the VORs that we can use at checkpoints as checkpoints. So we've got 3 big lakes. 1, 2, here's another one here, 3. And so now it's 25 miles. This is a bit misleading. It's not really going to be 25 miles till the next checkpoint. Really, while we're over this lake, we know exactly where we are. So the point where we start not being sure would be the other end of the lake. So what did look like a 25-mile leg from the west end of the lake till the next lake, you might start thinking to yourself, oh, well, I can't really see 25 miles. What's up with that? You actually cut that down to just 13 miles by continuing to use this whole lake as a checkpoint the whole time. That's an interesting one, the cluster of towers. You're right. Yeah, when they're a cluster like that, they are pretty easy to see. That's right. These are towers or obstructions here, or multiple obstructions. 2 numbers. Why are there 2 numbers listed for every obstruction? Correct, MSL and ADL. I usually look at when I'm up at the higher altitudes, I really don't care about the MSL numbers. So if I'm up at 7,500 feet, I don't care how high these are MSL. That doesn't help me. What I'm looking for is, where are the tall towers? How tall are these towers? If they're only 100-foot towers, they may not be as easy to see as a 1,000-foot tower or a 1,300-foot tower, and those do exist. So these are pretty small towers. They're 200 feet or 300 feet high. So they're not going to be quite as prominent, but they are in a cluster. So that's helpful. But my point here was that you use the entire lake as a checkpoint, and then we hop off at the end, and now it's only 13 miles. How long is that going to be from the east tip of that lake till the western tip where the bridge is? How long is that going to take at 120 knots? a fraction to killing people. I love it. Victoria's answer is fantastic. Mark's answer, fantastic. Chris's, yes, all good. Well, let's see, 13 miles, yeah, 6.5 minutes is the correct answer. Victoria, your estimate was pretty good. About 5 minutes is pretty good. Honestly, close enough. So for a thing of this size, you'd be okay with being a mile off. Six-ish is the answer I like the most here. It's an acknowledgement that that it's not dead on, but we don't care. Not playing favorites or anything like that. But that mentality of 6-ish is perfect because it's even more accurate than the 5-ish that Victoria had, but it's still an ish. Matt and Mike had the most technically correct. It is exactly 6.5 minutes. That's correct. So if you're comfortable doing that in the plane, and 13 divided by 2 is not too bad, it is actually fun to set a stopwatch and look for that 6 minutes 30 seconds. That can be really fun to do, but don't sweat it too much. Don't go, 13 divided by 2. Geez, I don't know. It's an odd number, and dividing by 2, that's kind of tricky. And don't give up. Go with the estimate. That's great. So 6-ish, 6.5, all good. 5, also not too bad. Okay, so we've hopped along these lakes. We've gotten ourselves to this VOR. Now I've slowed us down a little bit. I was going to almost attempt to do this in real time, but I've definitely slowed us down with some flight planning stuff, visualizing these different legs of the flight. But this is very quick. This happens very quickly when you're planning at this level. You literally see the lakes and go, cool, I'll look for the lakes. That's about the extent of it, quite honestly, in the air. It's only once you start measuring them. And on ForeFlight, you can literally put your fingers on the thing and draw a ruler with your hand, and it'll measure it. So it's fantastic for that. But I actually stopped doing that. Once I got a sense for the scale of the map, once I knew that it was within visual range to go from one lake to the next, I stopped counting and just enjoyed the view. And it said, all right, there's the second lake. Cool, it's got some bridges. Look at all the pretty boats on the water. You take the time to enjoy that stuff. It's really neat stuff. And then there's the third lake. Cool, here comes Quitman. Slight right turn. Restart the timer, and we're good. But let's keep going with this exercise. We're looking for more stuff. We've got a lake over here. It's probably 25 miles, and I haven't measured that, but let's see. 10, 20, actually I guess it's about 35 miles. Yeah, 34 nautical miles. I was doing 25 miles from the edge of the compass rose. I guessed that by just visually looking at how big that compass rose was, because it's from the center here till here is 10 nautical miles. That's the scale of compass roses. It's one of their best uses. So I just visually said, how many compass roses can I fit between the middle from that VOR to the edge of that lake? And I came up with about 3.5, and sure enough, it was 34 miles. Okay, so we've got a lake right here. Perfect. Keep it moving. Guess what? Another giant lake. Does it matter that we're not flying right over the top of it? No, same deal. The lake will be off to the right. That's beautiful. Track into the Belcher VOR. You don't have to measure it so much, but I basically kept tracking Quiltman on the way out. Quiltman on the way out. On the second VOR, you tune that as soon as you can, 117.4, and when then you're receiving it, you swap to it. So that's not how you do it when you're IFR. I know about changeover points, and that's a bit different. But for VFR, as soon as you're receiving the VOR, go for it. Make that your active one. Put the needle on center and just head to it. So we're looking good there. No major deviations from the course needed. Remember, I think we bent the leg at one point earlier on. We're still on a direct VOR to VOR at this point. I love these checkpoints so much, there's no need to turn. So we're just going to keep the straight line going. We've got some lakes. Keep it going. All right, continuing east. I remember this now. Talking to the approach controller, I remember trying to spot these airports. It was just kind of an interesting exercise. Once I got to Belcher, Shreveport, Louisiana was kind of interesting. There's Barksdale Air Force Base. That's right. I remembered asking the approach controller what kind of planes they fly out of there. That was fun. Now I can't remember the answer, unfortunately. But so I tried to find those 3 airports. I'm always trying to work out what you can see from certain distances, so I was curious what I'd be able to see. In the end, I never spotted that airport. I did spot Barksdale, and I did spot Shreveport Regional, but I don't think I was able to spot the really, really small one. And then we've got our river there. So I remembered saying, okay, there should be a long straight runway on the east side of the river, which from where I was looking that way was the left side of the river. and another airport on the right. So you look what's on the chart, and it's a skill you should never, ever, ever stop practicing. I feel very strongly about that. Is trying to identify what's on the chart with what you're seeing outside, and the more you practice it, the better at it you get. Nice, cool river to look at. That was fun. Cross over the river and keep going. Good size lake here, not as good as the other ones, but between having our 3 airports over on the right and then a good size one here, Minden, also a very serious road system. So this is all nothing. We got the bayou down here. No real major roads along our route of flight. These highways would probably be visible from here. This is less than 10 miles away or 10 miles away. So even though we're not heading over those roads, we can still use them. And then we'd cross over a train line. You've got Minden. Cross over Highway 19 here. Got a lake. Underground pipeline. Don't try and look for that. If you spot it, let me know. And hey presto, the next lake you see on the east side of that is Union Parish. So once you practice that, you can do that whole thing, no kidding, in about 60 seconds. 60 seconds to maybe 2 minutes. If it takes you 3 minutes or 4 minutes or 5 minutes, that's okay. It doesn't really matter at that point. We're not literally trying to race out the door. But this is not a 2-hour exercise. This is not a 3-hour exercise. This is something you can do relatively quickly, and this was a fairly long flight. Now, I remember now why it was planned as a 600-mile flight, because it's now another 400 miles onto Savannah. And while I was at the FBO, I did pretty much this whole thing. That's why I was confused for a minute. We did actually plan it all the way from Fort Worth all the way to Savannah using this technique. And so it continued. So we literally did plan this, or I did plan it, was just me. So we did plan a 600-mile flight using this technique in pretty much a matter of minutes. But the goal of this exercise was to stop at Union Parish. So then we stop here to Non-Towered Airport. And so now we've got our route of flight worked out. So I'm actually probably not going to cover the ATC comms around this as part of the core material, because that's not new and interesting. I will go through it if people would like to do that in the Q&A. But with the time I've got left, I've got about 7 minutes before we're at the two-hour mark. And don't worry, I'm not going to talk like a madman and try and finish in exactly 2 hours. That would be counterproductive. But I will keep it moving, and we will focus on the Bravo, because that is the core focus of this, as well as the long-distance flight planning. Reese had a really good question, which is, what are your weather concerns? Weather can change a lot in 600 miles. That is 100% spot on. So when I looked at the big picture for the weather, it was one of the first things I did, was to check out the weather systems. And it was spectacular weather the entire way. Just giant high-pressure system all the way from the central part of Texas all the way out to the coast. I did not see a cloud on that flight. So it was... when you see massive high-pressure systems, it just makes things very, very easy. And the terminal area forecast all along the route of flight, which, by the way, ForeFlight is magnificent at, same sort of thing. In fact, I shouldn't really compliment ForeFlight on that one. That's more of a Duart's weather briefing format. So when you push the button to say, give me a weather briefing on ForeFlight, it knows where you're going, and it gives you the weather forecasts for all the major airports on route, not in alphabetical order, but in the order in which you're going to encounter them, which is just wonderful. So what I did was I had the big picture, which was the high pressure system. Ryan, yes, I did have flight following for the whole thing for sure. So the big picture with the weather is looking at the pressure systems in the fronts, and that indicated that it was going to be a spectacular flight. Then when I looked at the weather forecasts for each of the airports that had weather forecasts, that sounds like a lot of work, but it's actually not. When you push the weather briefing button, you go to the terminal area forecast section, and they're all listed one after the other. I didn't read anything. I literally just looked at numbers. It's kind of like reading the Matrix, right? You got all these numbers scrolling in front of you. Everything just said clear, 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 and there was or broken flight level 250, things like that. That was literally it. Not just for now, but till like 2 or 3 in the morning. It was all looking fantastic. So very, very quickly it was wow, this is going to be a wonderful flight, literally all the way to Savannah, Georgia. So exactly, reset. It made it easy. But I have spent over an hour and 15 minutes briefing the weather on flights of this distance for IFR when the weather is not perfect. So that's the one thing that can put a huge hitch in the giddy up on these, is the weather can mess you up. But for VFR, I guess even for VFR, yeah, if the weather is anything other than perfect, you've got to take a pretty good look at it. So there we go. So we had our weather considerations. I'm glad you brought that up, Reese, because that was one of the first things I did, was look at the weather at that level of detail, the high level. Then once I had my route, then I asked for the full briefing, and then it was go. I did check NOTAMs, just so you know. I looked to see if the airport was going to be open. That's always good to know. And I did a quick TFR check, and there were no temporary flight restrictions. So now we can focus on, we were happy with the navigation. Airspace concerns, here was a Charlie that I actually didn't see at the high-level view before. It probably blended in with all these, with all the echoes. So it turns out there was a Charlie. Definitely not a factor because A, we're outside the lateral bounds, B, we're at 7,500 feet, so who cares? C, we have flight following. All right, so the big question, how on earth do you get from Dallas-Fort Worth to this lake? The answer is so simple. Anyone care to guess? It's a little bit of an open-ended question. It's not like I'm giving you a multiple choice, but anyone have any idea why it is so simple to get from Dallas-Fort Worth to the lake from a planning perspective? Exactly. Yep. ATC. Yeah, as I said, it was a bit of an open-ended question. So Moon says it's ATC. Chris says they control everything. Ryan says get a Bravo clearance from the ground right off the bat. Mark says you're talking to ATC. All of those, exactly right. There is no point trying to predict, is it going to be runway heading? Is it going to be a turn to a heading? Is there going to be an altitude restriction? What route am I going to take? It is so far out of your control, it's almost comical. And you can, I'm not trying to make it funny or make light of it, but it's true that at a Bravo, especially if you're unfamiliar and you're VFR, trying to plan the specific routing that you'd like, I'm going to follow this highway and that road and that lake within any kind of distance of DFW is comical. So it's good to know that up front because it actually simplifies things a great deal. We're going to get ourselves to the lake at some point. It's nice and big, so I'm pretty sure that we can get out to the east of DFW. So my goal is to get over here-ish, big circles over here. They have gates that they're going to try and get you out of that are not published. So on the ATC side, those controllers are going to put you out through a gate of some sort, which is either a specific point in space or it's a fairly wide opening. It's not a fix necessarily. It could be a fix, but more likely to be an opening, like a 5 or 10 mile opening. And so they're going to point me east. How do I know there's an east gate at DFW? There's got to be. There have got to be gates in the normal cardinal directions. And so if I tell them, one of the questions they gave me when I took off was, what's your on-course heading? And I told them it was about 090, something like that. You can say 087 if you like, do that. Trust me, the controller doesn't care whether it's 087, 086, or 088. So I gave him a round number. I think I said 090. And so that tells him I'm trying to head east. So he'll point me towards the east gate. And then what happens between there and there is anybody's guess. It ended up being a series of several headings and several altitude restrictions. I can't remember them all, but there was at least 2 turns to specific headings. Then it was resumo navigation, but still with an altitude restriction. It was at or below a certain altitude. Why did they give me that? Don't know, don't care. Probably to do with traffic flows of either departing aircraft or arriving aircraft. We'll never know, and it's not important. Just know that those are the sorts of things you're going to get. You're going to get headings, you're going to get altitudes, and they're real easy. If you can fly the plane, it's simple. And you can feel very warm and comfortable in the Bravo. No one's going to hit you because ATC separates everything except you and the seagulls. Everything gets separated in the Bravo, so they will keep you away from everything that is important. Is this airspace complicated? My word, it's complicated. There are shelves that I didn't pay a whole lot of attention to, and there's a whole bunch of airports. So the reason I didn't pay attention to the shelves too much is because I was climbing up to a pretty high altitude, so my intention was to be in the shelves the whole time anyway. And if they, for some reason, gave a restriction to get below the shelves, then I would deal with it. But my plan was to just tell them, I'm trying to get to 7,500. In my case, it was 9,500, I think. And then they'll give you instructions that are appropriate. So I hope it's not a letdown for people, but it's simpler than you think. From the time you take off, let's put it this way, it's simple from the time you take off till the time you're exiting the Bravo. So we're kind of working backwards, right? We haven't called for taxi or anything yet, but We'll get there, believe me. We're just doing it in a slightly different order. So initially the tower gave me some headings and then handed me off to a departure controller, and I must have spoken to 3 different controllers before I got to the lake. But who cares? 1 controller, 5 controllers, process is the same each time. Just check in with the next controller with your altitude. No biggie. And if they give you a turn, they give you a turn. If they give you on course, they give you on course. There's not much they can give you beyond that that's going to be a problem. So it's a shame more people don't do it, because it's a ton of fun, and as long as you're not too nervous on the radio, you just read back relatively quickly and concisely, and they treat you like gold. It was fine. Had a great time, in fact. So looked for the lake pretty quickly, and the higher you got, the further you could see. I did eventually spot these airports, so I knew roughly where I was. And then eventually I got the lake, and let's see, they had lost my request for flight following. So once I got to the east, as I was about to leave the Bravo, the controller checked with me. He goes, did you want, were you looking for flight following to your destination? I said, yes. He goes, okay, say destination. So he ended up having to re-enter the plan for me, or the strip for me, I should say. So I had to end up telling the departure controller what my destination was, even though I'd given it at the ground level. That was about the only hiccup in the whole flight, except for the part where I ended up in the sheriff's car. Okay, so let's see how you get out of DFW now. If anyone has a weak heart, this would be the time to reach for supplemental oxygen. I know, right? How many runways can you put in an airport? It's a competition. It's like Tetris. And this is where they lost. I think they forgot to flip this one, and that's where the game ended. Okay, so for time, I can talk about the arrival at some point if people want to hear about it during the Q&A, but I'll skip it. We are parked 13,400 feet. It's obscene how big these runways are. Here, Southwest hold pad, and departing 36 right, if memory serves. So I called clearance delivery. Now, just so you know, I didn't talk to anybody. I didn't ask any local pilots. I didn't get any local knowledge. I didn't ask the FBO. I jumped into the plane. I had fueled it up. Sorry, I'd gotten fuel, and I picked up the ATIS. Worth noting, a couple of different ATISes. So arrival ATIS, departure ATIS. No problem. Listened to the departure ATIS. Did that. Then called clearance delivery, 128.25, and gave them my spiel where I was parked, which was I've forgotten the name of the FBO that's there. So it's something along the lines of DFW clearance, Cessna 123 Alpha Bravo at whatever the name of the FBO was, with information, whatever it was, request advisories to Foxtrot 87 at 7,500. That was it. So the requesting advisories is an implicit VFR request. We could have told them we're VFR to Foxtrot 87 and the altitude. I knew that they wouldn't have a clue where Foxtrot 87 was, and that's okay. At some point somebody's going to ask you which way that is, but don't try and preempt it. When it's appropriate for them to know it, they'll ask you. When they care about it, they'll ask you. In my case, it was not the clearance delivery, not the ground, not the tower. Maybe it was the tower. By the time I think I got to the tower, they said, what's your on-course heading going to be? Because they're trying to work out, with your release. We've talked about getting the release. They're going to need to tell the departure controller roughly which way you're going. And now that I think about it, I think I take it back. The clearance delivery controller did ask me what the heading was, because that then affected the departure instructions that I got. That's right. I can't remember what they were, to be honest, but it was a heading initially and an altitude. It was at or below something like 2,500 or 3,000. So there was an at or below restriction initially and a heading initially, and then that just constantly changed as I went from controller to controller. But it wasn't much harder than that. And so initially he said, I don't have a strip for you, so here's the first hiccup. He actually thought I was IFR, and he's like, I don't see anything filed, and I'm like, no, we're VFR. He's like, okay, that's right. I should. He actually acknowledged that he should have known that, something like that. And let me see, did I get this right? I take it back. We're over here now. That's right, corporate aviation ramp, and took off on 17 right. That's right. Yep. So, yeah, not over down on the southeast side, actually more on this side. So they gave me the departure instructions and cleared out of the Bravo airspace. After departure, fly this heading, maintain VFR at below 2,500, and that was it. So I read it back. He's like, okay, contact ground, ready for taxi. And it was pretty complex taxi getting out of there. You've got Echo Fox, Echo Golf, Echo Hotel all right next to each other, which is a little bit weird. But I called ground, told them I was at the corporate aviation ramp, that's what it was, and they had me taxi out. And that was it. Swapped to the tower and did the usual. There's a little bit of a wait. That's right. They had me hold at Echo Fox, and then they launched a couple of jets off of Echo Hotel. So I was in the penalty box right at the very, very far corner, and they launched a couple of jets before me out of Echo Hotel, and I just waited, and that was about it. Only thing that was a little bit complicated, and a first for me, was parallel taxiways that weren't really marked very well. So normally when you deal with parallel taxiways, there's some grass or a median in between them. This one didn't even have that. I'll zoom in so you can see what I'm talking about. And this will actually be about the end of it, believe it or not. We've actually covered each of the pieces, even though we did it in reverse order. So we got ourselves the tower and explained how we got out. Then I swapped to clearance delivery, and now we're describing the process of getting from the corporate aviation ramp to 17 right full length. That's all that remains to happen in this equation. And the only thing that was complicated is you've got Juliet, Kilo, Lima, three parallel taxiways on the same piece of asphalt. And I have never seen that before, personally. So that was a little bit confusing. And I think they had me do Juliet. So that ended up being pretty easy. I just stuck right to the side. To be honest, I don't think I never identified what Kilo was. Maybe I was too far away from it to see it. These things are wide enough that I could have taken off. If I had just hit enough power and headed north out of the ramp, I could have been off the ground by the time I got to Lima. So maybe Juliet, Kilo, and Lima are easy enough to see. So I will admit I hugged the side really tightly to really, by process of elimination, work out that I was definitely on Juliet. I wanted to make sure I was nowhere near Kilo, and I didn't have a feel for how big that was. So I hugged the side. Thank goodness they gave me Juliet, not Kilo. If they gave me Kilo, I would have probably asked for some assistance or had a much closer look at what was going on. But it's pretty easy. It was Juliet to Echo Fox. So I just went all the way around the corner, held at Echo Fox, checked in with oh, that's right. Then it was Monitor Tower. So this was a little bit different and than a lot of other Charlies or Deltas. Rather than me explicitly swapping to tower and telling them that I was ready to go, it's very common at Bravos either for there to be a sign that says monitor tower, or ground will actually just tell you to monitor tower. So here's what's going on. The tower is very busy, and they don't want you checking in when they know you're coming. So it doesn't add any value. They assume you're ready to go. So at some point while I was on Juliet, ground just said Cessna 3 Alpha Bravo, monitor ground, and they gave me the frequency. Sorry, monitor tower, and they gave me the frequency. So I tuned into the tower, pulled up to the line, did my run-up while I had time, and then at some point they called me on the radio and said Cessna 3 Alpha Bravo, wind whatever, runway 17 right, cleared for takeoff. They don't even check if you're there. They assume you're there because you were told to monitor a while back. And then that was it. So we've linked up all the pieces. I apologize for going a little bit out of order, but I think we're good for the core, unless there's an immediate. I'll tell you what. If there's an immediate question about the specifics of this flight right here, I'll cover them. So let's do that first, and then that'll be the end of the core material at that point. So any questions around the immediate stuff? For example, anything we're looking at on this chart that's relevant, or anything you want me to cover on that Bravo flight? Wow. I hope somebody is at least awake. Okay, awesome. Either that or I did a spectacular job. We'll hope it's the latter. Well, thank you very much, everybody. That was awesome. I'm actually astounded that we managed to get through Charlie and Bravo, and only being 10 minutes late. I'm very, very happy that I managed to hit one deadline and didn't end up with a fourth. So thank goodness. Well, very good. Thank you very much, everybody. Thank you for coming. Great turnout. Hope you enjoyed it, and we'll begin the Q&A. And Mark, if you want to make that a separate recording, we can do that. All right.